Hi everyone, welcome back to Aquaculture Innovation Hour. This is our second installation of this webinar series. This webinar series is mainly hosting panelists who are experts and entrepreneurs in aquaculture in Singapore and the region, because we want to kickstart a conversation amongst younger professionals in Singapore so that people start looking at this sector more and realizing that actually there's a lot of work to do with this sector. It's incredibly important because we produce food, and food security has been on the minds of every Singaporean, definitely especially over the past few months. This conversation has been ongoing, but has received a lot of support from the government recently with the 30 by 30 grant. And today I am incredibly grateful to have both Kingjun and Zuridah, which I've had the pleasure of meeting in 2019. So they are both experts in the aquaculture field. Kingjun is currently the managing partner of Global Biotech Singapore, but previously he has had extensive experience in the aquaculture feed industry. And Zuridah herself has more than 8 years of publishing experience, if I'm not mistaken, in the aquaculture field as well. She is the editor of Aquaculture Asia Pacific. You are more than welcome to go and check out Aquaculture Asia Pacific as one of the foremost publications on a variety of issues in aquaculture. But could I get Kingjun, could you introduce yourself briefly? Like what you do currently, and
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Kingjun. I've been in the aquaculture business through the involvement as a manufacturer of feeds with a company called Gold Coin Feed Group. We started in the aquaculture feeds in the late 80s, probably 87, 88. And I helped start up feed mills in Jurong, in Singapore, then in Johor Bahru, in Lakin Industrial Estate. Then we moved on to Medan in Indonesia, and then Bekasi in Jakarta. And we did a joint venture too in India that never materialized. Then we set up a venture in Hajai. Then I left the company, and together with a group of colleagues and ex-colleagues, we started our own business called Global Feeds, and we had a feed mill in Medan and in Indonesia, in Jakarta as well. And then we started up in India, and I'm still running the Indian operation as we speak, despite all the COVID-19 impact that we have. So my field is mainly in the aquaculture feed industry, selling feeds to the farms, shrimp farms as well as fish farms. So in terms of, do I want to continue or we let Zuridah?
No, please keep going. Yeah.
So in terms of entrepreneurship, I am the old school. You know, especially for the young entrepreneurs wannabe, my advice is get some core competence first before you venture into any entrepreneurial business. So in my case, because I had been in the feed industry, so it's quite relatively easy to move out, to set up your own, because you already know the customers, you know how to manufacture feed, you have the advice of people like Zuridah on animal nutrition, formulation, and so on. And so it was relatively easy to repeat that process. The entrepreneurship part is putting together your structures, you know, from a company point of view, and putting together your shareholders and getting enough money, cash flow to be able to operate the business. I'm not sure for the younger ones today how they want to look at entrepreneurship in the aquaculture field, because you know there are a lot of new technologies, but I'm not sure how much risk.
We're ready. Live in a 3, 2, 1, go. All right. Hi everyone. Apologies for that slight delay. We had some technical difficulties. On air, for those who are just joining, we have Zuridah, editor of Aquaculture Asia Pacific, and has publishing experience for over 8 years. And we are also very grateful to have Kingjun, who's been working in the aquaculture feed industry. As Paul went out, he was just explaining to us where Gold Coin Feed Group has had experience setting up feed mills over the years, and the importance of getting for younger entrepreneurs in terms of getting core competencies, because Kingjun was telling us that after being in the feed business for a while, it was really easy to start his own venture with friends and ex-colleagues, because he already knew customers and knew how the business worked, and could even find advice from people such as Zuridah in terms of feed and nutrition. And he also mentioned that he's unsure how much risk there is in terms of younger entrepreneurs starting today, because the entrepreneurship sector of it is putting together structures, getting investments. And he actually has zero business in Singapore, because for the same amount of effort, he's able to sell many more thousands and tons of feeds in other markets, such as Andhra Pradesh. Kingjun, would you like to continue?
Okay, the other aspect that I wanted to touch on was, because we had core, just using the Indian experience, because we have core competence, we actually went into India to manufacture shrimp feed or prawn feeds, we call it. But it was a joint venture with a local Indian partner. And the genesis of it is that, we started to export our feeds from Medan, Indonesia to India. And then these customers say, come to India, set up a plant there. We can save the freight, we can save the import duty. So we did. So they had the majority share because they are there. They had 60%, we had 40%. But after 3 years, it went bankrupt. Why? Because, in the feed industry, in the shrimp industry, when the shrimp dies, they blame the feed. If the shrimp don't grow, they also blame the feed. If shrimp prices drop and they don't get payment, they also don't pay you. So we ran out of credit. So eventually we felt that it was a shame, because we had already installed, top class equipment imported from Taiwan to manufacture the shrimp feed. So we decided to go it alone. We set up a 100% foreign-owned venture without the Indian partner, and we, in the divorce, so to speak, we had the factory equipment ceded to them, and then we ran from them the space so as to help us start up manufacture. And because we have core competence, we decided we're not going to take the shrimp feed route. We go and service the fish farms, which had never been using pelleted feed. So that's how we started. So exactly the same point I make. You can only do this if you have some core competence in the industry. So that's how we have continued to be in the fish feed business in Andhra Pradesh.
Okay, thanks for that introduction, Kingjun, and for also explaining the business and like the highs and lows in terms of being able to going bankrupt, but then also being able to pivot very quickly. Zuridah, could you give us a brief introduction about yourself, what you do currently and also in the past?
Okay. I'm the editor of the magazine called Aquaculture Asia Pacific, which I started in 2004, actually, Benedict, and it is actually 16 years, double the time that you gave earlier on. Yes, it's been a long time. And then the company is actually set up in Singapore. Different from Kingjun. For me, it was easier to set up a company in Singapore and get the permits for printing. I also conduct this annual the roundtable in aquaculture series, and that's about, now it's going to be 10 years. Okay, so the magazine itself is distributed all over Asia, and it's the main idea for having the magazine. How I started was that I have always had this passion for aquaculture. So after I finished my master's and I did a PhD in NUS, it was all in aquaculture and aquaculture nutrition. I actually I was the editor of a magazine called Aquafeed. It was Susie was a former editor. And after that, I landed myself as editor of another magazine called Aquaculture, Asian Aquaculture. And the owner of that magazine decided that it was time to stop the, during those days, the aquaculture industry was not so, you can say, not so commercial. So the owner decided that having a magazine based on advertising revenue did not work out well. So then I asked some stakeholders in the industry whether they wanted a magazine, and that was the pull effect to start this magazine. It's actually, they actually supported me very well until today. So as an entrepreneur, I have been doing quite well. I have, of course, you have your ups and downs, but overall it's been quite interesting. And it's also because I have this passion for aquaculture, and I have this networking with the people in aquaculture. Aquaculture is actually a very, very small industry, and those that are in aquaculture, they always stay in aquaculture. So it's actually a lot of fun if you get into it.
Thanks for that, Zuridah. You mentioned this passion in aquaculture. I want to ask Kingjun, because I know you did your bachelor's in science and chemistry, and later on you did an MBA in NUS. Can I ask how did you decide, okay, I'm going to go into a feed business over other things, and why were you interested in aquaculture?
The truth of the matter is, after I finished my MBA in NUS, I was headhunted to join Goldcoin as the marketing director. So that involved pig and poultry feeds as well. There was no aquaculture business at that time. So they wanted to go into the field, and amongst the colleagues that we had, nobody wanted to look into a new field like aquaculture feeds. So I, being the new kid on the block, was offered this, and I happily, took on this function. And that's where Ronnie came in, and together we helped build up the network of companies. So just now in my introduction, I forgot, we also started Interfeeds in the Philippines, in Manila, where we had a feed mill for quite a number of years.
Okay.
So in a sense, I didn't plan to go into aquaculture. I was headhunted for a job in a feed company, and the new business development, possibility came up, and I took on the challenge to set up the new business.
Thanks for sharing, Kingjun. It's very interesting that it's a very serendipitous thing. You by chance found yourself in the industry, and to this day, you are still I would like to say quite successful in the industry in spite of the highs and lows. Zuridah, can I ask you for yourself, why did you, because you mentioned you did a master's in aquaculture, what interested you in this sector to begin with?
Initially, my first job was with the government in Malaysia. I'm actually a Malaysian. So
so am I.
Yeah. So, in the fisheries department in Malaysia, you handle aquaculture, extension, etc. And I started working with freshwater fish farmers. And I think it was during the time when I did my master's that I found that aquaculture is such an interesting field. If you are thinking of something in agriculture or livestock, I think aquaculture is much better. To me, it's much cleaner, okay, rather than going into a poultry house. So, but I think, and also because there's a there's always an adventure in aquaculture. It's a dynamic industry, and it keeps there's a lot of new things coming up. You have many species and new developments coming up. And for me, when I'm doing this magazine, there's always the extra knowledge that comes in, and this knowledge which I can pass on through the magazine or through the website to a lot of people. And you can also say that if you look at the aquaculture industry, as Kingjun would know, is about the earlier times when they started shrimp farming. It was all very traditional, and now things have changed. It's a lot of science, and we like, for example, we use microbial knowledge for the hatchery nowadays, rather than last time was just trying to it was always a feeling, the person that's handling the hatchery or the farming, he or she feels, oh, this is the right way, we do it this way, and we manage in those days. But today we can't manage that. There's a lot of the diseases coming in, etc.
I see. Thanks for sharing that, Zuridah. So you were talking about changes in the industry. I'd like to ask Kingjun, with your extensive, I guess one could say that you've seen the feed industry develop a lot. Could you share with us what were some of the key changes in the industry, and how did these changes come about? Did they come from entrepreneurs, or did they come from the industry, or did they come from the farmers, for example?
I mean, technology always keep on improving. So it's in the interest of the industry to make use of whatever technology that we have. So as Zuridah mentioned, even in shrimp farming, the white spot disease that wiped out Monodon has caused the species to be changed. Now they are into it, another prawn species. So have to adapt. And with the change in the species, then you have to look at, from the broodstock level right up to the farming, they have to look at the biocycles and their various techniques and various tools that they use, including, good water management in the daily monitoring of the water, the oxygen level, the nitrogen level, etc., etc. So, these industries are now being used and has to be continued to be used. And one of the findings that we had in the early days, I think it is still applicable today in shrimp farming, is there are very few successes in corporate farming. I think Ronnie in the last webinar mentioned that he is involved with a company called Blue Archipelago, and they have not really taken off, for the simple reason that I attribute shrimp farming has got to have the personal touch of the owner. So small ponds with the daily monitoring by the stakeholders is very important. In corporate farming, it's more difficult because middle of the night, if the electricity break down, the guy is not going to wake up in the middle of the night to fix up the genset in the corporate farming environment, I think. Whereas the individual, if he's a 1 acre pond and he's there and he can fix the pedal wheel, electrical connection straight away. So you need the personal touch to be able to keep up with the daily situation in the farm. That's my take on.
Then for these monitoring, what is your opinion on digitalization, and because there are quite a few companies emerging now to do with like digitalization and sensors and monitoring. Do you think those innovations could overtake that personal touch or like replace some part of it?
I'm sure it can be used. It depends on how user friendly it is. The more user friendly it is, the easier for them to adapt. And I think younger generations getting involved now in terms of management, as well as the what we call the pond assistant, are more educated compared to the old days. I'm sure some of this new digitalization can be put to good use.
Okay, thanks, Kingjun. Yeah, any thoughts on that?
Sorry,
Zuridah?
I was very interested. Sorry, during the hatch symposium that you had in Singapore in the substation. The guy who was doing the satellite mapping of the ponds in India, this is one area which I think can be used, because then people want to know, in terms of, for example, the feed industry, where are the farms located, how intensive farming these people are going in terms of, how many pieces per acre, that kind of thing. Yeah, these are useful information which can be used. Yeah, sorry. Okay.
Yeah, just a bit of context on that. Every year, Hatch holds a demo day as part of our accelerator program. And last year, we held it in Singapore, and one of the startups was a Norwegian company, but interestingly focusing on shrimp. And they used satellite imagery to forecast the output of different ponds. So this has been quite novel in the space. Zuridah, would you like to add?
Okay. What I want to say is that we are very lucky that in the aquaculture industry, we have the old generation, and they have been very, very persistent. They have a lot of problems, but they continue to continue farming. But now we are getting this new generation. They can be the ones that have been pulled into the industry by their parents. So, but they are different in the sense that some of them do not have the training they get the training maybe from the parents, but do not have the science training. And we also need to encourage a new group of young people into the industry. And you know that aquaculture is in a rural area, etc., especially if you are in a marine farm. So what I want to say is that, so we have to be prepared for this new group of people coming into the industry. And at the same time, we do not want an industry which is very unpredictable. So this is how I see. I see that using all this AI coming in and all that, you must remember that the industry has lots and lots of data. So all we need to do is analyze the data, get it going using AI, and maybe have systems whereby it can help. It can help people monitor them well. So this is where the young generation can come in.
Thanks for
in
that,
many
Zuridah.
areas.
Yeah, just forgot to mention the name of the company that we're talking about. It was Dynaspace. You can check it out on our website. And in all our portfolio. This has been something I've been thinking about in my own capacity as well. Because something we always say is like, our managing partner would say that you could have, we did this report, a shrimp report on the top 6 geographies that are producing shrimp. And he said he found a $7,000 piece of equipment below a bench because the local farmers over there, they were not able to fix that equipment that was supposed to monitor the feed or monitor the farm. So a thing that we always talk about is like, who are you innovating for? Will they be able to use it? But from what both of you are saying, it seems that with the younger generation taking over the management of farms, that capacity to use, for example, apps might be more present. Now, Zuridah,
Can I move the subject to Singapore context? and
Yes,
maybe
please.
ask Zuridah for her take. Multi-tier farming or raceways or indoor farming of shrimp and fish. There has been a lot of companies promoting this, but I have not seen much success. So I wanted to ask Zuridah whether she thinks that this can be applicable to Singapore, because Singapore is trying to have its own independence in terms of the imports of fish and shrimp, and whether you can set up multi-tier, multi-level farms in the Chua Chu Kang, Yio Chu Kang area that can help increase the local production and therefore reduce the imported dependence that Singapore has.
Okay, so we're talking about what do you call it, aquaculture, recirculation aquaculture systems, whereby you you really control the water quality. I feel that this is the way forward, because this is the way that we can control the disease if it's all managed well. But it requires a lot of technical knowledge, which rightly in Singapore we shouldn't have a shortage of. Yes, and there are farms in Singapore that they have started halfway through or whatever. But in the end, the concept is the investment amount is very high, and but we have to look at it in the long term. In other countries, for example, in Denmark, for example, they have also at one time they insisted that the farms do not do outdoor. They wanted to do salmon indoor because they want to conserve the environment. And there was a lot of sea lice problems in outdoor. So it's the same thing that we have here. So everything is a question of managing it well. And to me, I feel that you cannot get your returns immediately. So because there is no way, for example, in Asia, if you use these RAS systems for sea bass, you also have sea bass which comes from Malaysia. And the cost of production of sea bass in open cages will be so much less than the cost in RAS system. And in RAS systems, you need to think of having intensive systems so that you actually have the productivity level is much higher. So it's all these things you need to combine. And lastly, if you want to grow this within Singapore, they have to be branded, made in Singapore, so that the people want to buy them. The people will be proud to buy things made in Singapore. But I don't think that's the case. So it is not just producing them in these systems, but it's actually trying to market them well. So it's a whole concept.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Zuridah. You mentioned good management, good talent, for the investors to be realistic about their expectations and not getting the money back immediately, and for Singaporean consumers themselves who need to purchase made in Singapore goods as well. And thanks, Kingjun, for the question. Now I'd like to shift the conversation a bit. Zuridah, you've one reason why it's so great to have you on this webinar is because you've been an editor for 16 years. Thanks for correcting me on that. So I imagine that you have seen a lot of startups come and go as an editor. Could you name me one startup that you weren't so optimistic about when you were like including it in a publication, but later surprised you on how well they were performing? Let me know if you need some time to think about it, one or two.
Which startups do we? Are you talking about the startups that you had at Hash?
Not necessarily. I mean in general over the past 16 years. So, for example, a startup. Yeah, Kingjun?
Sea bass farming in Singapore. They have made so many. Nancy Wong's startup. I don't know how many big management changeover it has gone through now.
Yeah, but those are the ones that they started for a few years. So that they've always been problems with investment, I think, in the end.
Okay.
Yeah. But when we talk about I mean, I have ideas about people that have entrepreneurship, actually, not really startups. Those days it was just, we never used the word startups in those days, right?
Okay. Yeah.
We use, you start a business, and some people were very passionate, and they went on to sell the companies. I think that is the ultimate game, right? To develop something and to sell it. So there is this Australian company that did the acoustics. Remember Kingjun? And yeah, and in the end, it is he's joined Cargill to 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 link up with Cargill's overall system of digitalization of farms. Yeah, but and then I can't remember of a startup that has given up so far. There's the other startup which is where they do a post-larvae counter, and they're doing relatively well. And in the end, what these startups do is that they've started to market the products on their own, and gradually they join forces with groups of other companies, with groups, so that they can together give a total package.
Okay. Thanks for sharing that, Zuridah. Kingjun, now one of the points about this webinar is also entrepreneurship. If I may pivot back to more focus on entrepreneurship in Singapore. You've been a strong supporter over the years with the Startup Business Plan competition. I read in the CV that you sent me. What do you think it will take to increase the amount of homegrown aquaculture startups, in your opinion?
Difficult question, because we don't have many institutions teaching specifically aquaculture. NUS has got a zoology department from where Zuridah got her PhD. It was not focused on aquaculture per se. And I think Temasek Poly also has started up Aquaculture Education, helped by one of our old friends, Dr. Wee Kok Leong, and he's since moved on. So I'm not sure, in terms of giving proper technical training for aquaculture industry specialists in Singapore, I think it's still not there. And in terms of startup opportunities, it is, other than digitalization and using AI and using modern techniques, I don't see how other applications in aquaculture can Singapore-based entrepreneurs, can go into. I haven't seen, and I'm not sure.
Okay, thank you for that. Do you think these can be mitigated by the government? Because I know there are a lot of grants out there in terms of encouraging startups. Or is it the case where, like, young Singaporeans or from the younger generations like myself, we wouldn't even have this idea of aquaculture growing up? Therefore, we wouldn't think of it as a place that has problems that need to be addressed.
I think in terms of government support and government commitment, there has been no lack of it. I remember when I was in Gold Coin, we had a $1 million grant from the Singapore Science Council in like 1988, 89 to look at intensive fish farming in Singapore. So I actually went to Norway to to look at a floating raceway, which we thought would be the way to go and bring back the raceway into Singapore. But it never worked out, because when we did the numbers, as Ronnie pointed out during the last webinar, when you do intensive raceway farming of, for example, sea bass in that raceway, your daily output when it comes to harvest is more than what the Singapore market can consume. And two things will happen. Then your price will drop because the market is not so elastic. You know, when they will go oversupply, unless you process and freeze it and, you know, sell as frozen, which is a lower price, then, you know, you cannot sustain in terms of the cash flow and profitability. So we never took it off. So we had to forego that grant. And in the old days, Zuridah also will know, the primary production department, now is called NEA. They had a aquaculture section headed by very good people who provided support to the industry in terms, you know, they help out in like the Kelong guys that you had in the last webinar, you know, to teach and educate and upgrade skills, you know, to all these local Kelong farmers in Singapore. You know, so they did provide good support, but unfortunately, nothing, you know, materialized in a great way. You know, even though the government had put in a lot of money in that regards.
I see. Thanks for that. Thanks for that take, Kingjun. It's interesting that even with the government support, like that much support from so early on, even with all the evolving stat boards, that this sector has been struggling to take hold. So if there's a lack of entrepreneurs locally, Zuridah, over the course of your publishing career, have you been seeing more entrepreneurs coming up and across the board? And are they coming from outside, like other countries, and then are they settling in Singapore, or are they homegrown, or like from the region?
I think for the ones that are staying in, the ones that are starting in Singapore, the entrepreneurs in Singapore, that it is a mixture, right? There are a few startups that decided to use Singapore as its base. And you remember Umitron?
Yeah, Umitron.
Umitron, yeah, they are Japanese group, and they're using Singapore. Singapore seems to be the place for startups to be based. There's also the e-fishery, and I think the company is also based in Singapore. But they base the startups in Singapore, and they use the other facilities, like for example in Indonesia or in other countries. So I think this is the way, because if you have the technical information in Singapore, then you can use the field information from another country to develop something. But what I want to say, the entrepreneurs that we have in Singapore, it's always been quite a difficult thing for me. I've always had this fear. When I visit and when I write the article, sometimes I worry whether, you know, after a few years, they would close shop. And in Singapore, that has been quite common though, but not in other countries. In Thailand, in India, they have been there, and they're still there. It's only in Singapore. I think it's also to do with maybe the government regulations. I'm not very sure.
I see. Thanks for that. Yeah, please go on.
Yeah, but the thing I want to say is that, remember, the aquaculture is genetics, hatchery, grow out diseases, feed, and there's a lot of research that you can do. If you have the facilities in Singapore, there's a lot of research, especially in genetics, which you can do. Of course, you need to go out of. Nowadays, you can use genome technology to develop new strains and all that. Then you go out to do your trials or somewhere. Singapore is too small for it to remain like, for example, you can't do everything in Singapore, but you can do the starting in Singapore and you move out. And we can get all these our young people in Singapore to have the interest and to have something. And you have those people from Temasek, but they need to go further, as Kingjun says. Maybe you need to go out, work out in aqua farms first, then try to think of what business, what startup you would like to do. And this happens in Taiwan now.
I see. Thanks for that, Zuridah. A lot of interesting things that you mentioned, very relevant, very current. I'm starting to see some trends in the conversation that we're having today. So you mentioned that Singapore is almost a sort of, can be a great landing pad for startups to incorporate and then before branching out into the industry. And you also mentioned again this thing about talent and facilities. So personally, I also believe that we have the right talent who've done the degrees in biology, chemistry, even engineering to come up with brilliant ideas for the aquaculture field. It's just that they're not looking at it. For anyone who's viewing this webinar, we have a talent pool on the Hatch website. Please sign up there. But another reason why Hatch decided to incorporate in Singapore, and this was before looking at the grants, was because we believe that Singapore had the research facilities that made it so special to be able to trial and come up with ideas like you were mentioning, Zuridah, in terms of genome tech.
Benedict, can I share something with the group, the audience?
Yes, please.
In India, I see entrepreneurial possibilities in the fish industry in India. You know, the cost of fish X farm in India, say for example, the Indian carp is like 90 Indian rupees per kilo, and the farm gate price for poultry chicken is more expensive at maybe 120 rupees per kilo.
Yeah.
Nowhere else in the world is fish cheaper than chicken, you know, and fish is already known to be a much healthier protein source than chicken. So India being such a big headcount market, I see opportunities in exploiting with good marketing the fish meat industry to be able to reach out to the consumers, you know, especially for the urban cities like Hyderabad, Bangalore, Chennai, the big cities. You can have easy, ready to cook fish packaging for TV dinners, so that, you know, working couples, after they finish work, just put the package of masala fish into the microwave and heat up, voila, you got your dinner ready. So I see there are a lot of opportunities possible for entrepreneurs in the Indian market to do things like that, brand it well, package it well for the retail market, and that is a big consumer market out there. Right now, the Andhra Pradesh fish industry mainly exports their fish domestically to the neighboring state of West Bengal, where Calcutta is a big fish eating community, and they are taking whole fish. They're not taking filleted fish, you know. So I see a big industry potential if some entrepreneur in India capitalize on the differential price between poultry and fish, and manage the marketing well through the retail markets in the urban cities, and then push out branded processed fish in the industry. I see that possibly. That's why I've been working, and I've got help from both Zuridah and Susie Fraser on whether there are studies done that can prove that using pelleted feed for fish farms will produce much better meat quality compared to using raw materials, which a lot of the traditional fish farms in Andhra Pradesh are doing at the moment. So there are opportunities, but you have to look at the industry and the location.
Thanks. I think that's a good. Thank you for mentioning that. Let's transition now to our Q&A section. Just as you were mentioning about the India market, Kingjun, Susie Domini has a question for you, and that's how rapidly is commercial feed developing in India?
Very rapidly. In fact, when we first went into Andhra Pradesh, we were the first to introduce pelleted fish feed into the fish farms. But because of the work of American Soybean Association, they went to promote the use of soybean in using floating feeds which are produced by extruders. So a lot of the fish farms that were breeding pangasius, which is our patin, or the catfish here, were using floating feeds. And over the last 5 years, there are at least 12 new companies who jumped into the market, most of them without core competence, and just, you know, were entrepreneurs and just went in, and the main route to success is extend credit to near harvest period. You know, that means you don't have to pay until you harvest your fish, which is like 9 months. Now they're paying the price for it because farmers are not paying you because the market has collapsed in that regards. And with COVID-19, it's even worse, the cash flow. So, you know, to answer Susie's question, yes, commercial feeds in India have really multiplied quite a lot in the state of Andhra Pradesh, where a lot of the fish farming are done, and they have gone overboard. And now I think it will the market will consolidate in that regards.
I see. So then that's back again to your point about the importance for entrepreneurs to have core competencies. Now, and to understand the industry as well. Andrew James has a more general question. Andrew says, sustainability is important for the growth and stability of the industry. Where is the most excitement in Southeast Asia with regards to sustainability? Zuridah, would you like to answer this first?
I think it's all over. Okay, the first place that I can think of is in Thailand. Okay, they have learned so much. They used, for example, in the shrimp industry, they used to produce 600,000 tons. Now they are doing 300,000 tons, and they have learned that is the way. That's the way forward. Firstly, you try to control prices, but it doesn't help that India is also producing quite a lot of shrimp. But the way they're looking at is that the markets demand that you have some measure of sustainability. Of course, economic sustainability is a given thing, but then they are going into social, environmental sustainability is very important for the Thais.
Okay, thanks for that, Zuridah. Keng, do you have any comments?
Yeah, from an India perspective, the current traditional method of fish farming is they mix. Some are still using what we call the oil rice bran, DOB or DORB, and they tie into bags and tie along the pond, and then the fish goes and bite at it. See, because these are raw materials, they are very pollutant. Any unused oil rice bran that does not get eaten by the fish floats to the bottom, and so this is a big source of pollution in terms of environmental pollution of sludge and natural material for bacteria to multiply. So we have been pushing very hard, and I'm looking for someone who can champion this cause of environment and let the government decree that no raw material should be used in the fish ponds because they are pollutant. If that can be done, then I tell you the pelleted and floating fish feed industry will boom in India.
Is there a big cost difference between the oil rice bran method and the pelleted feed?
There is the basic raw material will be cheaper, but they have to use much more because their feed conversion rate is much higher than the use of nutritionally balanced pelleted feed. So we for 1 kilo of a pelleted feed, they have to use maybe 3 times the amount of the oil rice bran. So in a sense, they are penny wise, pound foolish, because they look at, oh, the oil rice bran is only about 12 rupees per kilo, whereas our pelleted feed is like 20 rupees per kilo. But if you look at on a feed conversion basis, serious farmers who do their calculation on economics and profitability will know that use of pelleted feed will give you much better profits in terms of your better feed conversion rate, in terms of your better average daily growth rate as well. Okay. And disease, because you have big time disease problem if you have got a very foul bottom in the pond.
Got it. Thanks, Kingjun. Very, very relevant point. Maybe also something to be said about extending lines of credit to smallholder farmers. But a big part of it, I imagine, is also changing the perceptions of farmers. Maybe we have time for like 2 or 3 more questions. There's a question by Charles about, and Zuridah, to some extent, you mentioned about the regulations, because you mentioned just now that whenever you interviewed Singapore entrepreneurs, you had a fear that they will close. To what extent do you think regulations play a factor in this?
I may be wrong, but from what I know is that Singapore does not have a lot of land. So sometimes the land has been given to an aquaculture farm, but the leasehold always expires too quickly. So it's taken over for some other activity. This is what I know. So I've heard of farms that had to close down because the lease has finished.
Yeah. Kingjun, do you have any thoughts on this?
Singapore is a well-regulated place, so people have to be compliant. And sometimes for entrepreneurs, I know that there are entrepreneurs who are classified as serial government-supported entrepreneurs. They get seed money and they continue to get grants and so on, and dependent on that. I think it's in my mind, it's a wrong start for entrepreneurs to want to do a business just because they can get government seed money, and then after that they cannot sustain. So it's very difficult. Because once you get government money, there are a lot of compliance that you need to meet, milestones to meet and forms to submit, and so you have to look at whether it's worth the time for you to get into a situation where you are too busy having to comply with all these regulatory requirements because you've used some government money.
Yeah, and I think I agree, and I think that should be the way forward, and there should be more conversations about this as well, that entrepreneurs shouldn't just look at grant money, but they should have a very sound business plan and sound product or service that to take it forward in the first place, and perhaps look at grants to support them through an initial phase, but that should definitely not be the main reason why people go forward. We have a question from Mansoure Gayanido. Apologies if I pronounced that wrongly. Do you have any do you have any, could you recommend any sources that talk about innovation, and how can one support any new ideas? So I think I'm rephrasing this question a little bit, but I think Zuridah's publication, Aquaculture Asia Pacific, has a lot of resources in terms of innovation, or a lot of examples, if I may say that.
Yeah, but I must say that there are a lot of publications in aquaculture publications that actually focus on innovations. But the best places would be when you go for conferences and you find that that is a place where startups will come and do their presentations. So you'll find these innovations. There's a lot of innovations in Taiwan, for example. And because Taiwan has a very, very strong aquaculture, I have to rephrase that. The universities in Taiwan, they focus a lot on innovations in aquaculture. This is how they get the young people to be into aquaculture. So that's another avenue for information.
Thanks for that, Zuridah. I'm mindful of time here. We are approaching 5 p.m. Do both of you have any other comments in terms of wrapping up comments before I wrap up the webinar?
Okay, I have to make a few statements. The startups that I have sort of met and talked to, they most of them have shown this thing, the passion. I have to revert back to the passion. They're working together with industry. You cannot be a startup if you are in the university arena only. You need to be down with the industry, learn what the farmers will require. And I want to say that, again, aquaculture has got many, many areas. And for example, in Singapore, you have the waters around Singapore. Doing water quality startups, I'm sure there's a really required. Trying to find things about how to predict red tides, for example, because that's what kills most of your marine farms in Singapore. That's another avenue. But again, it is always working with industry. It's not working in the silo in the university itself.
Thanks for that, Zuridah. Kingjun, yourself?
I empathize and sympathize with Singapore-based entrepreneurs for the simple reason that it's not a level playing field, you know, because Singapore is such a small domestic market. So you want to be able to start up with a business idea and a business plan based on starting up in Singapore and then being able to scale up to other countries. Then when you go to other countries, you have to be aware of different cultures, different business practices, different regulatory requirements that you have to comply with. So it's really a difficult, it's not easy for entrepreneurs to survive in that kind of environment where you can only start up in Singapore and then you have to scale up elsewhere. So the best is if we can get some young Singaporean youth to get involved in the business in Singapore and scale up, like I mentioned earlier, for domestic production that will help the nation sustain itself in terms of dependency on imports. And if we can do that on RAS or recycling or multi-tier, farming method in intense areas like in Choa Chu Kang or Yio Chu Kang, then that will be a big bonus in terms of being able to use technology for the good of Singapore.
Thanks for that, Kingjun. Multiple things, and thank you both for being on this webinar. Multiple things were talked about in terms of education. Zuridah, you mentioned Taiwan has education institutions, which Kingjun identified as a great need for the local aquaculture startups to really grow and to come into their own. having educational institutions are really important. Kingjun, you mentioned also that maybe it is a reality of local startups that they need to start here, but then look beyond our doorstep to the rest of Southeast Asia and Asia, where 89% of the world's aquaculture in terms is actually produced. Also talked about the need to really refocus one's reason for being an aquaculture entrepreneur. It has to be the passion that leads it in the first place, and we can't just look at government grants as the main reason to move forward. There has to be a real need that the innovation is addressing. Many other things were mentioned, but I can't wrap them out all. I just want to thank the audience for listening in, Moritz and AJ for helping us out with the tech side, and of course, Zuridah and Kingjun for taking the time on this Friday evening to join us and share their wealth of experience. I'm very grateful to you both. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Yeah. Okay.
Yep.